Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Let me start off by asking this question. Why is superannuation sexy? Because most people think it's not. Most people between the age of 20 and 30 wouldn't even look at their superannuation. I'm going to touch on that, and hopefully I'm going to make this different for you. But let me start off by saying something that by law I have to say. Everything I'm about to say does not constitute personal advice, nor does it even constitute general advice. I'm going to be talking about the industry as a whole. Nothing I should say should influence how you make your investment decisions one way or the other, now that we've got that out of the way. Why is superannuation sexy? Well, let's rethink the pitch. Particularly Generation Y are frustrated. They want to make change. They want to see their leaders in politics and in business make change. They want the world to operate differently from the way that it is. And we like to say this: politics and protest aren't the only way to make change. Use the power of your capital to make change. And this then raises a question, particularly for young people. Did you know that you had capital? Did you know that capital has power? And did you know how you can influence where your capital goes? And one of the things we love to say in Australia is the largest financial decision that most Australians make will be about buying their home. The truth is, those entering the job market today, the largest financial decision they'll make is probably their superannuation. And they won't even look at it. Many people don't understand compounding interest. ASIC, the government, assume that growth funds and superannuation will compound at 8% per annum. That means if you invest $1 at the age of 20, compounding at 8%, that dollar will be worth $32 on retirement. If you invest $1 at the age of 50, it'll be worth $2 on retirement. In other words, every dollar you invest at the age of 20 is 16 times more important and more powerful than the money you invest at the age of 50. So why do we accept it when young people say superannuation? Forget it now and worry about it later. When what we really need to do is get young people to worry about it now so they can forget about it later, so they can build their wealth, so they can build their capital, but use the power of their capital to make change. But how do we do that? How do we engage with each individual account member to get them excited about their capital and give them a mechanism by which they can control that capital? And the answer is you've got to use good IT. So before I go into that in a little bit more detail, let me give you just a quick outline of Good Super. And let me reinforce, this is not a sales pitch. I'm not encouraging you to join Good Super. This is not financial advice, either general or individual. Government says I need to say that. We have three pillars: invest, improve and unite. Invest in the sense that we want to grow your wealth. That's what every superannuation company says. But we also want to stop you making unnecessary expenses, and I'll outline one of those in a moment. Then improve. We are not an ethical investing fund in the traditional sense, with a negative filter that just says I'm going to divest in alcohol, firearms and tobacco, and therefore aren't we good? We're a little bit more mature about that. We look at the way the capitalist system works, particularly in the developing world as well as in Australia, and ask ourselves, how do we influence change? How do we get corporations to move from bad behaviour or medium behaviour to good behaviour? Because if all you do is invest in good companies, and good companies stay good, what change have you made? If you want to change things, you actually need to take a poor performer and make a poor performer better. So under our improve leg, the power of capital, if we allocate it well, by sitting down with senior executives of mid-performing companies, for example, and saying, how do we increase the amount of good you do with your capital while also being profitable? Let me give you an example. The world's leading anti-malaria program is not run by Save the Children or the World Health Organization or UNICEF. The world's leading anti-malaria program is run by BHP Billiton around Mosul, Mozambique, where they have an aluminium smelter. They've reduced adult malaria infection from 92% of the population to 5.6%. In doing so, the improved community health has reduced absenteeism in the workforce from 22% to 2%. And the reduction in absenteeism has improved the productivity of their asset by an amount higher than the cost of the program. In other words, the anti-malaria program is profitable. To which some people say, see, doesn't that prove they're bad? To which I say, hang on a second. There are 3 legs of sustainability: social sustainability, environmental sustainability, and financial sustainability. If you don't get the third, the other 2 fall over. So what BHP has actually fallen upon is the world's most sustainable anti-malaria program with measurable social good, measurable financial good. Imagine if you could invest in that. Imagine if your superannuation company found opportunities like that and invested in those. So you would be able to say to your friends around a barbecue on a weekend, the power of my capital that I didn't realise as a 20-year-old I had, or as a 30-year-old I had, is actually going and investing directly in the world's leading anti-malaria program. And not only is it making people's health better, it's making me wealthier by growing my superannuation capital, which in turn makes me more powerful because I have more capital to allocate to more improvement activities around the world. Our third leg is Unite, and this is where IT really comes in. Imagine if you had a direct engagement with your superannuation firm. Think about this. When we think about politics and protest, we get frustrated about our political leaders. We turn around and we say, aren't they short-term in thinking? They're just looking at Twitter. They're just looking at social media. Where are the long-term challenges facing Australia in social, physical infrastructure and other issues? Think about this. Right now in the superannuation industry, 109% of GDP is managed by superannuation, growing to 190% of GDP over the next 10 years. That's $1.9 trillion today, growing to about $3 trillion over the next 10 years. As an industry, superannuation has more disposable income and discretionary investment capital available than does government. Not only that, the average Australian has 3 superannuation accounts. Most superannuation companies write to their members each quarter. Here are our quarterly returns. 1 letter every quarter times 3 superannuation accounts is 12 letters a year between the superannuation industry and every Australian worker. Read every Australian voter. So are we actually barking up the wrong tree, asking our politicians to think long term? If there's more discretionary capital available in superannuation, and there are more touch points between superannuation and every Australian voter, 12 letters a year, surely we could unite members of superannuation funds and give them an IT-based mechanism to decide where their capital goes in solving some of the long-term issues in Australia. Leave the politicians to Twitter and let's make the real substantial changes out of our superannuation industry. We are in the process today of building that third leg, Unite. It is an IT-based platform where we're going to be saying to members of Good Super, you get to vote on how some of the funds under management gets allocated. Anyone in Australia can nominate to Good Super a project for funding. Anyone. Members of Good Super get to vote, and the top 5 voted projects go to an investment committee, and we analyse them with compliance with the law, financial return, etc., and then the top voted one gets spent. In a way, it's a bit like crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is I have an idea and no money, and we're saying, well, we have money and no idea. You could really misinterpret that. But this is going to be an IT-based platform, and it will only work if we properly engage people and see who is interested. And how can algorithms help in that? Think about this. We are a financial services system, and we're talking about fully integrating IT systems across a number of platforms to do some really imaginative things. Why hasn't it been done before? And why are financial services companies so bad at systems integration? The data you just heard in the introduction about Melbourne and Sydney being in the top 20 or 30 of financial hubs in the world is true. And it's largely because we didn't suffer through the global financial crisis. Back in the early 2000s, the Australian banks all squealed to the government, please deregulate us, allow us to invest in, I don't know, collateralised debt mortgages and things like that, and the government said no. And because the banks couldn't invest in those, they didn't. So when they all collapsed, every other bank in the world became vulnerable except Australian banks. So the Australian top 4 banks went around the world and cherry-picked all these assets. So we now have each of our top 4 banks is in the top 20 in the world. But what a systems integration challenge they have. How do you bring all those different banking systems together with multiple systems, multiple languages, multiple cultures and multiple regulatory regimes? That is an incredible challenge. And failure to do so is so high. The risk of failing it is so high. So why don't we instead do an East Germany? And what do I mean by that? When the Berlin Wall came down in the late 1980s, Reunification happened, the end of the Soviet Union, you had an enormously poor East Germany with no basic infrastructure and an enormously wealthy West Germany. Whereas most of the wealth now, it's in East Germany, and the Chancellor is from East Germany. Why? When you start from scratch, it's easy to build the newest stuff. Trying to retrofit is difficult. Building from scratch is easy. And as I said, if you don't get it right, imagine the risk. Imagine if ANZ stopped operating for just one day. A major technical glitch and their computer system went down for just one day. What would happen to the settlement on houses that day? What would happen to the stock market on that day? What would happen to the financial loans on that day when various businesses were on the last day of their deadline because some people push it late? How many businesses would go bankrupt? How many property sales would not go through? How far would the stock market fall if ANZ stopped operating for just one day? That's the risk. And that's why retrofitting is so hard. And that's why companies like ours can start from scratch and build a brand new computer system. And then ask this, is it better to be a financial services organisation trying to sort out an IT system, or being an IT company moving into banking? Which one is likely to give you the better and more innovative financial services IT-based platform into the future? And that's where we get really exciting. I was asked as part of this presentation to talk about algorithms, and the question I was asked was, well, don't people want to speak to their financial services company anyway? People hate speaking to automated machines and pushing button 1 and pushing button 4. Hands up if you hate that, because we all do. So the assumption is, by most banks and financial services organisations, I really need people to speak to people on the phone rather than the push buttons, because the push buttons are really aggravating. Well, we go one step further than that. What if an algorithm could tell me your problems before you even realised them? So you didn't actually need to contact me in the first place. So you didn't need to have the option of pushing button 1 or pushing button 4 or speaking to a human. What if I was able to say, hey, were you aware of this problem, or were you aware of this opportunity before you even knew? And all you had to do was tick a couple of boxes and, for the sake of regulations, read the product disclosure statement, or at least tick the box to say that you have. Imagine if an algorithm was able to tell me all of that sort of stuff. Imagine if we solved your problems before they happened. A bit like Amazon. Those of you who buy books on Amazon, get those emails every now and again. Here is a personally selected range of books for you to look at. And I don't know about you, but I often buy them because they are books I'm interested in that I didn't know about. What if financial services could do exactly the same as that? Let me ask you this. What if you were losing $100,000 on retirement for spending you're already doing without realising it for a product you might not even need? Think about that. And I'm betting at least 50% of the people in this room are in that position. And let me explain. How many of you know where all your superannuation is? Put your hand up. All of it. How many of you don't know where all of your superannuation is? About half. How many superannuation accounts do you have? The average Australian has 3. Think about that. Did you know a few years ago the government changed the law, and in most cases you have to consciously opt out of life insurance, permanent disability and income protection insurance attached to your superannuation? Hands up if you knew that. One. So how many life insurances do you currently pay for? How many income protection insurances do you currently pay for? How many permanent disability insurances do you pay for? Because if you have the Australian average of 3 superannuation accounts and you haven't opted out, you might find yourself paying for 3. Then let me ask you this. Do you have dependent children? And if you don't, why do you even have any life insurance, let alone 3? Now, I'm not giving you financial advice. Again, I've got to outline that. Here is my personal circumstance. I'm 48 years old, unmarried, no kids. I jumped online a little while ago and I found I had 2 superannuation accounts, each with permanent disability, life insurance and income protection insurance. I, in my personal circumstances, don't need any of that. But I've had that attached to my superannuation for a long time. I cancelled it and then calculated if I hadn't cancelled it, I would have lost $50,000 capital on retirement for products I was buying but don't even need and don't even know that I was buying it. If you entered the job market today at the age of about 20 and you don't engage in your superannuation, like most young people do, they got a job at Hungry Jack's, a job at the local fuel station and a job at the local pub. 3 jobs. Didn't tell the employer which superannuation account they had, so they've got 3 default superannuation accounts, the Australian average. They didn't opt out of insurance. So they've now got 3 superannuation accounts from 3 part-time jobs with 3 sets of insurance. If you had a mid-level insurance coverage, that could cost you up to $1,200 a year each account, or $3,600 a year. In other words, you'd need to earn up to $50,000 a year before you start saving any money in your superannuation. If you had a low-level insurance coverage, and I assume that 8% compounding growth on insurance, and you do nothing to fix your insurance from the age of 20 to the age of 65, you could be losing $100,000 of capital on retirement for a product you didn't know you were buying that you might not even need, and you could easily fix it. So imagine if we had an algorithm that alerted you to that. So you're not contacting me with a problem. I'm contacting you with an opportunity. Did you know you could save or gain $100,000 capital on retirement if you fixed just this problem? Click this link here to find your personal circumstances. Go and get your personal financial advice and then ask yourself if you should. And indeed, interesting exercise for all of you. Later on today, check your superannuation. How many accounts do you have? Do a Find My Super search and see how many superannuation accounts you do. Ask yourself how many of them have got insurance, how much am I paying on those insurance, and then use the My Money website of the government and calculate how much that would mean on lost capital on retirement. And strangely enough, it's going to be somewhere around about that figure if you fall into those categories. And then I urge you, go and get the personal financial advice and tailor your product for your exact circumstance. The point is this. People don't like pushing automated buttons. People don't even like to talk to the banks. But what if we had an algorithm that found your problems in advance and sent you communication about those problems, got you to think about them, got you to analyse your own financial circumstances, and then improved your wealth by $100,000? Imagine if we were able to do that off the back of an automated system. So what fuels our growth? I'm going to go right back to where I started. Because we can tell you when things go right. We don't wait for you to tell us when things go wrong. Like I said, politics and protest aren't the only way to influence change. Use the power of your capital. And the greatest pool of capital you will have in Australia is your superannuation. And when we finish building that voting system, we can fundamentally change the place in which long-term issues about the future of this country and this planet take place, because we will have your capital focused on those problems. So the story for the investors in our company and the story for those who are members of our superannuation funds is that you can do good with the power of your capital and you can improve your wealth at the same time. And the basis of all of this is an underlying IT infrastructure that makes it all work. A basic underlying algorithm that points out to us where issues and opportunities are for our members before they even take place. Let me therefore hand over to you and to those who are watching live online for questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Look, absolutely fascinating. I mean, to hear a conversation start off with the idea that super is sexy, you know, is unusual. I've heard other presentations start off with share trading sucks. So we've run the full gamut. In terms of engagement with customers and response to that, what sort of traction are you finding that a proposition like Good Super gets?
I think we get a lot of traction, particularly amongst the 20 to 30-year-olds, and the reason is quite simple. They're frustrated. And we're taking something that they haven't even thought about and told them that they can actually allocate their capital. Because up until now, young people think, I can't turn my superannuation into beer, and because I can't turn it into beer, I'm not interested in it. And we're saying, well, you might not be able to turn it into beer, but we can allocate it in a way to solve some of the problems that you complain about while you're drinking beer. And by doing that, we get a lot of interest and traction. And we've nearly doubled our funds under management just since December. And that's a very good indication of the interest that people have in our product.
And in terms of that story too around being able to direct capital towards projects and opportunities that actually drive social good as well, how are you finding building out that mechanism and getting access to a pipeline of projects? Like I said, people can nominate things. Yep. How's that actually going in practice?
Well, let me be clear. That third step about building the voting mechanism, that's still being built. Right. We haven't rolled that out yet. Our target to roll that out is from the beginning of next year onwards. But you do hit another point that at the moment, there's not a huge pipeline of projects that you can go in. We do some investment through Social Ventures Australia, for example. And Social Ventures Australia does have a problem with pipelining. That is, are there enough good social impact projects out there? Now, we have in superannuation $1.9 trillion of funds under management. There is not, at the moment, a mechanism to allocate $1.9 trillion towards social ventures. But what if we rethought it differently? And I deliberately gave the BHP anti-malaria example for that reason, because right now, BHP is a big evil miner and we hate them. Well, that's what a lot of people think. But in terms of employing people in the developing world, they do incredibly well. Rio Tinto, for example, is the largest employer of Indigenous Australians. Marshall Langton, the Aboriginal activist, said nothing good has happened to Indigenous youth since the European settlement of Australia except Rio Tinto. By giving them employment, giving them jobs and returning them dignity, there's a lot of things that are good in that. So we turn around and say, if we have the more adult view of understanding that as flawed as a well-regulated capitalist system is, and there are plenty of flaws in a well-regulated capitalist system, it is not only the best system that exists on the face of the earth today, it is the system that's responsible for bringing more people out of more people out of poverty than any other economic system that we've tried so far. So why not fine-tune that? And if we were able to create, for example, it doesn't exist yet, but we're hoping that it will, something like a social impact bond for the BHP anti-malaria project. Imagine if you could do that. Because right now, if you want to invest in the BHP anti-malaria project, you need to buy shares in BHP. So you're investing in everything BHP does, and some of it you might not like. But what if you're able to invest in a social impact bond for the anti-malaria project, or a social impact bond for Rio Tinto's Humboldt project, or a social impact bond for ANZ's bank's financial literacy projects throughout Asia Pacific? Those projects which are responsible for the empowerment of more women and girls than anything else. So we say it's time that we now not only see that we've got all of this capital in superannuation, but use the power of that capital to invent and create a whole series of financial products that currently don't exist, and financial products that will be based on social good as well as financial good. And when you've got enough capital wanting to do that, you drive the market. So that's what we're really wanting to do. So our first step is to engage our members in that financial literacy discussion so they understand the finessing of what we're talking about, so we can then use the power of their capital to drive new products.
Yeah, okay. And in terms of engaging people around that conversation too, in terms of the algorithm and what it can contribute in terms of financial services, how have you found the response to that, both from people investing in as well as you start to build this business out?
Let's be clear, we are in the development stage of that.
Yep.
Our investors are incredibly excited because they see if we get that right, we will unlock an enormous amount of power and we will change the dynamic between a customer and their financial services organisation, because we will far more empower the customer. You empower the customer and you give the customer what the customer wants, a lot more people will come. We will be the only superannuation company that has a direct engagement mechanism between its members and their capital in deciding how their capital is spent. Get that right and you're first to the market on that, everyone will come over.
No, absolutely. Okay, we might open up to some questions from the floor now. Have we got, I see some hands. We've got one down the front here. We'll just get a microphone down.
Oh, that's all right, I'll shout.
Oh, just for the people online so they can hear, that's all. Yeah.
Can you just explain how you make your money?
Well, our money, like all superannuation funds and financial services funds, is a percentage of funds under management and a couple of other things.
But if you're using AMP Capital, other pension funds beneath you, aren't you just putting a layer of bureaucracy on top? Aren't you adding costs?
Most superannuation funds are what's called a fund of funds. At the moment, we are largely a fund of funds with some direct investments, but as we grow out, we're going to do a lot more direct investing as well. And what you're saying is exactly right. There is a whole series of interrelated contracts between hedge funds and sub-funds. Now, the retail management fee and the wholesale management fee for funds can often be very different. So what you're actually paying for, regardless of whether it's Good Super or Australian Super or whichever other superannuation company, what you're paying for is actually the selection of funds to understand which ones are good or bad. There are thousands of managed funds out there. If I turned around to you and I said, well, which ones are the best for what you're wanting to do, where do you start? And most people simply don't have the time to go through all the different funds or individual stocks or individual opportunities to make their decisions. So that's what you pay a management fee for, is for the allocation according to what the product disclosure statement says is the philosophy of the investment fund.
Okay, have we got any other questions from the floor? Yes, just down the front here.
Hi, I'm probably one of those ignorant 30-somethings. I just was curious. You have to preface everything you say with this is financial advice, please talk to your consultant.
Correct.
How can you apply an algorithm to basically make those recommendations?
Well, see, we can raise the issue, but in everything we need to do, we need to stress that people need to take personal financial advice. That's what the law says, and I actually think the law is right in that. I can tell you a general issue, like I can tell you the issue about life insurance. But I need to know your personal circumstances about, do you have dependent children? Is there enough money in your bank to cover your funeral costs if you were to die? That's what life insurance is about. So I actually need to engage with you individually. So I can raise the issue and then you need to be able to engage with someone to make a well-informed decision. The one thing we don't want to do is create an automated process that pushes you into products that you may not need. In effect, that's what's happened with insurance and superannuation now. And let me give you a very personal example, because I'm not kicking insurance for the sake of it. The reason the government changed the law to opt out of insurance is because we are one of the most underinsured countries in the world. The fastest growing demographic of homelessness in Australia is the over 65-year-old female. Why? Husband dies. Husband in that generation used to run all the finances, and the woman either doesn't know where the money is or there was actually no money left and she's left destitute. Or in my personal circumstance, my younger brother unfortunately passed away in Bali last year and it cost $35,000 to fly my family over, pick him up and bring him home. That was gone money until we discovered there was life insurance attached to his superannuation, so we were able to get some of that money back. I'd much prefer my brother than the money, but there you go. So this is not a kick on insurance. It's raising exactly the issue that you've put out. What are the individual circumstances? So I can use an algorithm to raise an issue, But once the issue is raised, it will be different for every individual, and individuals should take financial advice about their personal circumstances.
So in that conversation, Andrew, it strikes me that one of the key things here is people being aware of the options that are
Correct.
available to them.
Correct.
And I think, you know, part of what you highlight is that it's very difficult for any one individual to be across everything and highlight those, and that there's potential through some sort of algorithm to unearth what those options might look like. So I take it that's...
Correct. I mean, the insurance is just a good one. There are people in this room who are relatively financially literate, relatively well off, might even be running their own small businesses. And running their own small businesses, they'll be looking at a lot of expenditure, right down to the smallest number. Yet they might have 3 superannuation accounts, and they might have multiple fees and multiple insurances without knowing it. And that will probably have a bigger effect on their long-term wealth than the penny pinching and their small business balance sheet.
Yep.
But how can you choose if you don't know what your current circumstance is? So the algorithm first has to make you aware of the current circumstance.
Okay. Time for one more from the floor. If we've... Yep, microphone.
Given the demographic of your membership base, have you had any interest in the proliferation of the direct, the member direct options, the direct investment options?
As I said, we're still building that bit out, but there is more interest in the direct investment option than there is in the fund of funds option. I'm going to be really excited when we launch this and it rolls out, because it's the level of that engagement that we're anticipating. And for that system to work, let's just play this one out for a second. We have 5 options going off to the investment committee. We've got to spend time informing our members about what those alternatives are and the pros and cons of each of them, and what the long-term financial return is and what the long-term social impact is of each of these options, and empower our members to have a much more informed choice about where their capital is being allocated than it currently is. That's going to take a lot of building, and it's going to be really exciting when it's up.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. Could we all thank Andrew for his presentation?
Thank you.